we're live.
All right, let's go ahead. Well, we're supposed to start with Michelle, but she said that she doesn't need to.
Oh, we are hearing that's
The new changes that are highlighted in draft 3.2 basically have to do with xylazine and making sure that it fits with what the veterinarians are concerned with, that they still be able to use the xylazine where needed. And evidently, in some states, there's been banning of xylazine, and then the veterinarians can't use it when it's appropriate to use it. So that's what we're trying to deal with. So I would call first.
So do you want me?
Did I just describe it, or?
You did, and I told you that I didn't need to describe it, but I'll just make one statement if that's okay. So for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel. And so on the xylazine language that's highlighted there, just what I did in the interim since you last took this bill up is that I worked with the Department of Health to make sure that they were comfortable with that definition of xylazine. It's kind of funky if you look at it. I'm like, is that right? Did I make a typo? But that's how it's supposed to be identified for its chemical compound. And then also took the recommendations from the American Veterinary Medical Association with regard to some tweaks that they wanted to see in the language. You'll recall that the language that I had in the bill was modeled after federal legislation, so I just kind of integrated those two with the AVMA and the DOH recommendations. So, but the policy is all the same. It was really just around technical language.
Okay. So our first witness is Jay Green from Racial Equity Policy and Research Analyst. The Office of I suspect he's talking about the entirety of S58, but I'll leave that to him. Today. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for having me in testimony this morning and for receiving my testimony remotely. For the record, my name is Jay Green. I'm the Policy and Research Analyst for the State of Vermont Office of Racial Equity. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to discuss this latest draft of S58. So I think I would like to start by grounding my testimony in an accurate picture of where we're at in terms of violent crimes in the state. There's been a lot of discourse about an increase in violent crimes and a lot of, frankly, fear-mongering around violent crimes in the state, in the media and elsewhere. And I don't want to diminish the harm and trauma caused to victims of violent crimes and their families, but I do want to remind us that we are making policy here that affects everyone in the state, and we shouldn't be following narratives that are lying with statistics. So I'm going to just share my screen briefly here and show you data from vermont.gov. Oh, sorry. I will wait for Committee Assistant Donsbach to allow me to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So what I'm sharing on screen right now is the data.vermont.gov dashboard. This shows the violent crime rate statewide by year. This is the rate of violent crime per 100,000 individuals per year. And as we can see, from 2017 to 2020, we had a slight increase, and then we're on actually a decreasing trend right now. From 2019 to 2020, the rates of violent crime dropped back down to the same level that they were at in 2017. So all these narratives around violent crime being dramatically increasing, frankly, are not borne out by the data. Okay.
Yes.
Senator
yeah, I'm sorry. Was there also, could we also see for between 21 to 24, or I guess 23, if that was on the website?
It is not up on the data.vermont.gov website. And I I would welcome testimony from others who have more up-to-date data, but my impression is that also from the data that was shared by Dr. Robin Joy from the Crime Research Group in House Judiciary yesterday, she provided testimony on women's, the rates of crime related to, anyway, I'm getting off topic, but I'm sure that Crime Research Group of Vermont has more up-to-date data that they could share in testimony, but I'm disputing the consistent narratives around we should all be frightened that there's a dramatic increase in violent crime in Vermont. I don't think that the data bears that out.
Let's not have a debate.
I just wanted to see the data.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jeff.
so thank you. So I would also like to address sort of the underlying concerns that our office has with this bill, which is that this is not a public health informed approach to addressing substance use disorder. This is a approach designed to leverage increased criminalization and the criminal justice system to address substance use disorder. And it relies on a sort of binary conception of dealers and users as two separate populations, where if you punish the dealers, the people who are using drugs, they're mutually exclusive. And I have personal experience, and national research also bears out the idea that, in fact, we shouldn't be thinking in binaries when it comes to substance use disorder and dealing versus using. I volunteered for syringe services programs in Minneapolis and California, and I trained people to use naloxone to reverse overdoses. And one really memorable experience that I had as a naloxone or Narcan trainer was working with a family. There were several individuals who came to the Minneapolis AIDS Project's syringe exchange, and they had had a brother and a cousin overdose and pass away within the week of when they were coming to us for naloxone training, because they didn't want to see any other family members pass away from drug overdose. And it was a tremendously emotionally impactful experience, being able to teach them how to use Narcan to reverse opioid overdoses and hearing their deep sorrow at their loss of their family members, because basically the whole family had substance use disorder issues, and it was intergenerational, like parents and children and grandparents. And it is unfortunately very often that we see multiple overdoses in the same community and the same, even the same family group, because people are getting their drugs or whatever they're using from a sort of network of other folks that they know and trust. So I think that people, when they see a family member or a friend overdose, and they may have given that person or sold that person the substance that they overdosed on, are already dealing with not only their own substance use disorder, they're also dealing with the grief of knowing that they contributed to their friend or family member's death. And that is an intense burden to carry without also subjecting them to increased criminalization. Not to say that I'm not disregarding the idea that there are large-scale drug dealers who deal drugs. I'm concerned that laws like the dealing with death resulting are going to capture many people who are dealing with substance use disorder themselves and dealing with the fact that they may have contributed to a loved one's death. And my anecdote is also borne out by national research. I'm quoting from a study from North Carolina The best data available, however, indicate the people who are most often charged under drug-induced homicide laws are the family and friends of overdose decedents who are characterized in public media as profiteering dealers, when in reality, most people who use drugs also sell or deliver to friends or relatives on occasion. I see Senator Wachowski has a hand up.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to finish.
Oh, I have a number of, this is going to be a very long.
Middle of your sentence. Senator Wachowski.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jay. I'm assuming, and I could be assuming wrong, but I think I recall some other states have passed laws like this, increasing penalties in these instances. And I wonder if there's any data that shows the impact that has on whether or not
I'm sorry,
someone.
I didn't hear what you said about after increasing penalties for what?
For these drug-induced homicide type, like laws like.
The death result.
Yeah.
Overdose death.
Yeah, and my question is around if there's any data that indicates that laws like this actually prevent people from seeking help in the instance of an overdose because they're afraid of the penalty.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, because that was actually going to be the very next point that I made. A study from the American Journal of Public Health titled "Persistent Criminalization and Structural Racism in U.S. Drug Policy."
You know, I gotta interrupt
case
because
of
I'm getting frustrated with the conversation. In 20 years ago, this committee passed the first Good Samaritan law, I think in the nation, that allowed somebody who was overdosing in an apartment to call police with no repercussions towards that person, in order to try to save people that were dying in an apartment. This has not been a committee that has pushed through bills willy-nilly that, you know, try to criminalize stuff. But I'm getting damn frustrated with the conversation that tries to make us look like the bad guy here, when it's the drug dealers and others who are causing overdoses. And when I meet families who've lost a loved one, it's a pretty traumatic experience. And what has happened in so many cases, we have done everything we can in this committee over the years. And what year was that we passed that?
That was in 2013, so.
2013, our first one. You know, I've had people that I've been close to die of drug overdoses. So, you know, the song and dance that we're getting tough on drugs and blah, 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 you know, I'm frustrated with that part of the conversation. I'm sorry, Jay, and Tanya, but you know, we can't keep playing this, in my view. I'm frustrated, so let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I
don't think we're out to get anybody. If anything, we're out to prevent drug overdose deaths. But when they occur, when somebody says, and you know, this is an actual case of somebody very close to me who had an overdose, and the people that provided him with the drug that was laced with xylazine said, drag him out the door. They dragged him out the door of the motel room. They tried to get somebody to drive him around the corner to die so they wouldn't get blamed. You expect me to feel bad for those people? Luckily, somebody called the EMTs, and when they tried to use Narcan, they were unsuccessful, but they were successful at reviving the person. I can't feel bad about those people who were in that motel room who just wanted to get him out of there to die. They didn't care if he lived or died. They just didn't want to be responsible for it. So that's who I'm talking about here. And if you're all going to feel sorry for that person, be my guest. But I'm not. That person who gave them the drug. That's where I'm coming from, and I'm sorry if I'm being overbearing.
I certainly recognize that we all want to help.
I appreciate you sharing your personal experiences, and I want to reflect on how difficult and emotionally impactful that situation was. And if you would allow me to continue my testimony, I'd like to discuss why I think that increasing criminal penalties, dealing with death resulting is going to make people more reluctant to call for help and exacerbate exactly the situation that you just described. So in response to Senator Vyhovsky's question, I wanted to bring up an American Journal of Public Health article, which discusses that additional criminalization of drug use, and I'm including dealing with homicide, dealing of drugs with death resulting, law enforcement approaches towards addressing substance use disorder, drug distribution, and drug dealing. There's not good policy evidence that shows that it decreases the incidence of drug overdoses. There's significant evidence from reliable peer-reviewed public health journals discussing how it increases people's reluctance to call for help in these situations. So I don't think that we're in opposition. I think we are on the same side. Our office is concerned with the policy decisions that we're making to reduce the incidence of drug overdose to address people with substance use disorder. And our office is firm on needing a public health-based approach to this. And this bill as 58 is a very law enforcement based approach. We're not preventing overdoses. We're punishing people after the fact and increasing our reliance on the criminal justice system to handle substance use disorder on a societal level. And when we rely on the criminal justice system, it tends to have racially inequitable impacts. The other relevant Vermont data that I wanted to bring up was a recent study from the Crime Research Group of Vermont, which was published in 2022. And I want to note for the record that the Crime Research Group did not assign a cause to these disparities. They merely observed the disparities in our criminal justice system. So basically, they found that Black defendants in Vermont state courts were less likely to be referred to drug diversion programs than white defendants. So I just highlight this result to, again, remind the committee that our Vermont state criminal justice system is not immune from the kinds of racial bias that I'm referencing in national studies. So the other relevant research report that I wanted to highlight was from the Pew Charitable Trust.
Before we go any further, there is a bill on diversion I expect coming from the House. And do you have any further information on why there's racial disparities in referrals for diversion in Vermont?
That specific study from Crime Research Group does not assign a cause. They just did a descriptive study, not a causal analysis. If I had to speculate based on national research, based on my best understanding of implicit bias and how implicit racial bias plays into these kinds of decisions, I actually have a visual to share with you on this. If you wouldn't mind me sharing my screen. This is from the testimony that I gave to Senate Government Operations last year. And I'm sorry, I have too many tabs open in my browser.
Members of this committee are on Senate Government Ops, so maybe they heard it last year.
I'm gonna have to be reminded what it was last year. It was a long time ago.
So this was testimony on
Joe Biden.
There we go. So this was testimony on H480 that eventually passed as Act 55 of 2023, which was a property valuation bill instructing our office to collaborate with the Department of Taxes to reform the policy around property valuation to make them to lessen racial disparities in property valuation. So I'll share my screen now. So this was the slide that I shared with the Senate Committee on Government Operations to show how racial bias is sort of the air that we breathe, and it's everywhere, and it's very persistent, and it's a constant message. So if you'll look at the slide that I'm sharing here, these are two Associated Press articles. The first article, these are both from after a great deal of flooding took place after Hurricane Katrina. These are photos from New Orleans. The first photo on top says, a young man walks through chest-deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store in New Orleans. And the person in the photo is a young Black man. The bottom photo says, also from a national press outlet, says, two residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina. And those are two people who look like they have lighter skin, or I'm not sure if they are white or not, but they clearly have lighter skin. And yeah, so these are the kinds of media messaging that we are constantly fed and constantly exposed to. And this sort of implicit bias is, again, backed up by national research on how people respond to Black versus white defendants. So if I had to make my professional estimate of where a great deal of bias comes in Vermont's criminal legal system, I would say that it is likely influenced by discretion and those decision points that we have where individual people decide who is more culpable or less culpable, who deserves a second chance versus who deserves increased punishment and criminalization. And there are laws and policies that increase there are laws and policies that contribute to it is a structural problem. It's an individual problem. It's everything from at all levels.
Jay, if I might ask, and the ACLU is here as well today. When we get to the diversion bill, assuming it passes the House, and we get to that after crossover, I would like to try to address this problem. If both of you can do a little research on Vermont. I had not heard that we had, well, one can assume you have racial bias and everything, but I had not heard it was that pervasive in diversion referrals. So if it is, we need to find out why and what we can do about it. And if it's geographic or if it's systematic or system-wide or just geographic areas of the state.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree that would be that is what our office's Division of Racial Justice Statistics is charged with determining, and I am sure that a member of our Division of Racial Justice Statistics would be happy to discuss some of the challenges they face in that data and identifying the sources of disparities using the current data collection systems.
If it's not in the bill as it comes to us, there may be a way of putting something in the bill that would require them to keep that information as we go forward so we can better understand how problematic it is or isn't. But please go ahead. I interrupted your.
Thank you. So I've spoken to sort of some of the general principles and the general concerns that our office has with this bill. The last point I wanted to make was a point from the Pew Charitable Trust research report, More Imprisonment Does Not Reduce State Drug Problems. And I've provided this graphic to Committee Assistant Donsbach to share on screen. But I am happy to share it myself here. So what I'm sharing is going to be figure 3 from the Pew Trust study. So what they did was they compared 3 measures of how you would define a drug use in a state. They looked at self-reported drug use. They looked at, I'm forgetting exactly what 3. It was a very comprehensive study, and I'm happy to provide the committee with a citation after this. But so this figure 3 from their study really, I think, does a great job of explaining the paper. Aggressive approach to drug crime yields no drug misuse benefit. So this shows how the state of Tennessee is in 2015 or 2018 when this data was published, was 5th in the nation in terms of imprisoning people for drug offenses, and New Jersey was 45th in the nation for drug imprisonment. And then when they compared the measures of drug use, they found that Tennessee is actually 2. Well, they're roughly the same. Tennessee and New Jersey are roughly the same in terms of their actual drug use rates, despite the higher reliance on criminalization and imprisonment and incarceration to deal with drug substance use disorder in Tennessee. So I really hope that the committee thinks carefully about what policy solutions we're putting forth to address opioid use disorder or other substance use disorders in this state, because there's ample research that demonstrates that increased imprisonment does not decrease drug use.
But yes.
So to just provide some comments on draft number 3.2 of S58, and I will submit these comments in writing later for you. There's a number of provisions of this bill that are concerning from a racial equity perspective. I'm concerned about the, let's see here. I'm especially concerned from a racial equity perspective about the provisions of the bill that relate to termination of tenancy or eviction. Like, for example, on page 5, we have section 4, unlawful drug activity in a dwelling, flash citation conditions of release. This one, I just have a note in my comments here. I would like to know from the Senate Judiciary, I would like to hear from witnesses from the state Judiciary branch, what their concerns might be about this process increasing backlogs in the criminal justice in the court system, because they testified, Judge Zone testified that he was concerned that having emergency hearings for emergency arraignments for violations of conditions of release would cause an increase in the backlog, and that was on Tuesday when we were talking about S195. So just flagging that here, I'm concerned that we may worsen the issue of court backlogs. I'd like to hear someone from the Judiciary testify to that, whether that's the case.
I think he testified on it, but I can't recall what he said.
Yeah.
I think I don't want to say what he said because I don't remember exactly what he said and I don't have it in my notes, but I suspect he said that they would do what they were required to do under the law.
Absolutely. I would expect nothing less from Judge Zone. He's always committed to following the law and enacting the statutes that the legislature passes, but he did raise some concerns about creating more workload on the limited number of judges time that we have. But I'll leave that up to Judge Sonnet or another witness from the judiciary to flesh out that argument and whether I'm correct in applying that argument to this bill or not. I'm curious the logic behind on page 6, changing the date of lease termination to 7 days from the actual notice of eviction instead of 14 days from the actual notice.
Was just, I think the recommendation came from the Burlington Housing Authority. I think it came from the Burlington Housing Authority, a concern that the 14 days was too long. We haven't actually done markup on this section yet. We're scheduled to do it later today. But I believe that came from that the current system wasn't working to evict tenants who were involved in drug activity or other illegal activity to the detriment of other tenants within the building. Basically, I think it's called Decker Towers. This is where a lot of this piece of the bill came from.
Yeah, so our office, I mean, for one thing, I'm concerned that this, the application of this ordinance, one, will be racially inequitable, that more people of color will be removed using these eviction proceeding laws. And two, I'm concerned about the possibility that people will be made homeless by this, because Vermont's housing market is extremely challenging, and it's extremely challenging to find adequate housing. So I'm worried that we are going to send people on a path of instead of supporting them in their need for substance use disorder treatment, we are basically kicking them out of their home and destabilizing their lives in a way that will make their substance use disorder more difficult to treat.
I guess from Decker's point of view, and with Decker's Towers.
Yes, you're right.
And, people that live on Pleasant Street in Bennington, their point of view is we can't move because of the housing shortage. And yet we're terrorized every day by drug dealers and others who come into our apartment building and use and, do what they do. So, I mean, there's that one side of the tenant who is doing everything right, who is unable to move because of economics as well as the housing shortage, and is terrorized, versus this section here dealing with the leaseholder is also somewhat, I understand that, because reading an affidavit, the woman was basically held hostage in her own apartment by the drug dealers who were forcing her to both have sex with everybody that came through the door, as well as providing her with a small amount of drugs to keep her habit going. So I do feel for that as well.
Yeah, and that sounds like an extremely traumatic and frightening situation for that person who was victimized by the other people in her apartment building. And I'm not trying to discount those experiences, but I do want to highlight that by making this a policy on a statewide level, we'll be capturing those cases, and we'll also be capturing people in the criminal legal system who are dealing with substance use disorder and might be better helped by enhanced community mental health services, other forms of restorative justice, rather than evicting them and making them homeless. in Vermont's current housing market, where it's extremely difficult to find new.
Bob?
Yeah, I think, and I could be totally wrong, Jay. When you look at the section in itself, the writ of termination is a 14-day process. Now, all this is saying is that in the event, this is based on alleged criminal activity and so on and so forth, that they've simply sped the process up from 14 to 7 days to ask them to leave. It's not putting anybody on the street. The following procedure will still go through judicial review. But this is because of the alleged public safety threat here. Okay, they're asking them to leave 7 days prior to that, the way that it's presently on the books would lead now. They don't have to leave. They still can, then the landlord will still apply for a summons and a complaint and go through the process and so on and so forth. So this isn't the do-all be-all here. And when we're looking at this, you talk about members of certain communities. Well, those same members could be the ones affected who are being threatened in their own homes and apartments within the Decker building, as for instance here. So this is nothing more than something that speeds the process to get them into court if they so choose to go before judicial review.
Thank you for saying that. I'm a little confused because on page 7, if you look at I'm on draft 3.2. If you look at lines 12 through 15, it's subdivision 3. For an eviction based on a leaseholder's criminal activity, illegal drug activity, or acts of violence, any of which threaten the health or safety of other residents, that an eviction proceeding may be commenced with 7 days following the mailing of the notice. So is the eviction proceeding, and I'm sorry if this is my understanding, but does eviction proceeding mean the person is no longer allowed to live there, or does it mean that the judicial proceedings commence 7 days?
We have scheduled John Gray at 9:45, who's legislative counsel, who drafted these sections. I think it may be better to wait for him to walk us through these sections, as we haven't even walked through them yet. Then we'd be happy to have you respond. I'm way behind now in my schedule, and I don't know what we're gonna get to, because we only have till 10:15 because of a General Assembly this morning. So if you could, I'm gonna ask you to hold off on sections regarding eviction until John Gray's walked them through the committee, walk through them with the committee.
That makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that the committee is aware of the effect of crime-free housing ordinances, and I'll submit a citation to this, but basically crime-free housing ordinances are a tool that has been applied in a racially inequitable way to evict people of color without due process. And our office is very concerned with making landlords the sort of arbiters of who has committed any criminal activity. We would really want to make sure that any statutes that involve evicting someone for alleged criminal activity give the person who's being evicted due process to, and not make the landlord the sort of judge, jury, and executioner, to use a bit of a hyperbolic phrase, but because when we enable landlords to act as with basically a law enforcement powers by deciding who is or is not committing a crime, that is demonstrated to have racially inequitable effects and tend to result in more evictions of people of color.
I would prefer to wait until we haven't even walked through the section yet that John has written, the draft person has drafted, so it's hard to respond to your concern without knowing what. I think Senator Norris is correct. It's the same process that we've had for years. It just, it's been on the books, just not used.
Okay, I will wait to respond, but I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that, the issues, the racial equity issues with crime housing ordinances. My last comment, since we're running out of time here, was that our office is generally not in favor of expanding the Big 12 offenses. And since we're waiting for walkthrough on this new amendment and such, I will save my comments on that. But it is, our office does not support expanding Big 12 offenses where youth can be presumptively charged in or arraigned in adult criminal court. Thank you very much for taking my testimony and for giving me this time and opportunity. And I will stay online and be available for continued commentary on as we go through the bill walkthrough.
And John, if you need to go somewhere else, feel free. I don't think we're gonna get to you until, we actually, right now, we're 3 witnesses behind.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, so I would guess we're gonna have to cancel, we're gonna have to redo this part of the,
Okay.
if Ben can work with you to find a different time to continue the walkthrough of this section.
And if y'all happen to have time at like 10:40, 10:45, if you find that you've gotten there, just email me and I'll see if I can.
How would 9:45 tomorrow morning work?
I think tomorrow morning I'm in economic development, but let me.
But if you aren't, we'll have to do it next week.
Okay,
Ben will.
that sounds good. But if you happen to.
I'm
We have
sorry-
joint hearings.
I'm
We
sorry.
have a joint assembly.
This just took longer than we ever expected. I didn't realize.
Oh, you're good. Then I will see you guys shortly.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Sure.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, so we're gonna now look at the xylazine sections of the bill. And we have Dr. Christian Haas, State Veterinarian, Director of Food.
Morning, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on the amendment that, as I understand, was added or created yesterday or close to that. For the record, my name is Kristen Haas. I'm the state veterinarian with the Agency of
Well,
Agriculture.
just to correct, it's been in the works for weeks.
Thank you for the correction. Subtle changes, which we very much appreciate. And I will keep my comments brief. I certainly acknowledge the very serious nature of the subject matter in S58 that you're contemplating. As a Vermont citizen, I appreciate your looking into this, but I am here on behalf of the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association to provide comment very specifically on the amendment or the language pertaining to xylazine in S58, and that which speaks to the accessibility of xylazine for use by practicing veterinarians in Vermont. And I'm aware of, I was provided with the latest version of that language. And the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association support this language and appreciate your committee's willingness to incorporate the specific language regarding xylazine. And in short, what you have added here or what you have incorporated into S58 helps ensure that veterinarians in Vermont, especially those in large animal and food animal practice, are able to continue to utilize this important medication for the work that they do. And that in turn does have a direct positive impact on animal health, public health, and the integrity of our food supply. The availability of xylazine for veterinary practice is especially essential in bovine practice, where it is used for purposes of ensuring safe animal handling as well as animal welfare during otherwise potentially painful veterinary procedures and adequate pain control there. So
What does xylazine do to a 2,000-pound animal?
it is used as both, in some instances, an anesthetic and in other instances as a sedative. So it calms them, it quiets them, it allows them to be less reactive and therefore safer for the animal, a more efficient, for instance, surgical procedure or safer animal handling.
What would it do for a 120-pound woman or a man?
Good, well, I don't have experience with that. I would default to my public health colleagues
Okay.
to fill you in on
Thank you.
that, but you're
Well,
right, it is
then-
body weight dependent, the
My
dosage.
other understanding of part of the problem with xylazine being used by humans is the sores. It was reported that somebody at Val Vista needs an amputation of the limb because of the use of xylazine. It doesn't have that impact on the animal.
No, sir, it does not. It is a dose-dependent medication. You are going to be hearing from Dr. Tom Linden shortly.
Okay.
He's a practicing food animal veterinarian, and I think he could give you an excellent brief overview of
Well,
what
those
his
are the
experience.
questions that I have, is like, why does it have such a disaster in health-wise, why it has such a disastrous impact on people that use it, sores, et cetera, and obviously death also, but,
It does not in animals when properly utilized and
Because they use
prescribed
the
by a
right
veterinarian.
amounts.
Exactly, yes, sir, yes, sir.
the testimony from the Department of Public Safety, Dr. Trish Conti, the lab, head of the lab, was that about 50% of the glassine bags that they're testing now have some xylazine in them. We don't know how much because they don't test the amount in the bag.
Mhm.
So it's readily available in the legal drug supply.
Yes, and certainly supportive of efforts to remedy that issue, but what we also are cognizant of is maintaining appropriate legal access to this professional sector for the essential duties that they provide, both through their veterinary work, through the veterinary work on animals. It's in fact protecting our food supply and ensuring food security and accomplishing other positive things. So, but again, Dr. Linden would be able to give you a practical perspective on that. So that concludes my comments. We appreciate, on behalf of the Agency of Agriculture and the Vermont Vet Medical Association, you considering inclusion of this language, and I will turn it over to my veterinary colleagues who will go from next. Thank you for the opportunity.
We have Dr. Lindsay, I'm sorry, your last name. Hornickel, the American Veterinary Medical Association. Located where are you?
I am in Washington, D.C.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, much luck to you down there. And welcome to Senate Judiciary. We want to hear your thoughts on S58, particularly the section dealing with xylazine.
Yes, very good. And I appreciate that. I have remarks here. It takes about 4 minutes. I know you're tight for time, so I will stick to that, and I'm happy to stay for questions. So thank you again, and good morning, Chair Sears and Vice Chair Jim and members of the committee. I'm Dr. Lindsay Hornickel, Assistant Director in the Government Relations Division of the American Veterinary Medical Association. On behalf of our 105,000 AVMA members, over 400 of whom live in Vermont, I appreciate the opportunity to emphasize the importance of preserving veterinary access to xylazine as Vermont considers legislation to address illicit xylazine. The AVMA is deeply concerned about the emerging public health threat of illicit xylazine and the negative impact it's having throughout the country. It is critical that as policy is developed to address the illicit supply and that new enforcement tools do not impede legal and responsible access to xylazine by veterinarians and our clients. The AVMA believes the amendment offered in SB 48 would preserve access to this critical drug for veterinarians, and we strongly support its inclusion. Xylazine is a prescription animal drug used to facilitate safe handling as well as safe medical evaluation, treatment, and surgical care of many species. Ready access to this drug keeps people safe and supports animal welfare while working with cattle, horses, zoo, wildlife, and laboratory species. In cattle, xylazine is the only safe and effective drug for sedation. In zoo and wildlife species, compounded xylazine is administered through darting systems to safely sedate patients remotely. Preserving the ability of veterinarians and their clients to sedate fractious and large animals is critical to keeping people and animals safe. Preserving veterinary access also relies upon keeping the drug on the market and minimizing supply chain disruptions. There are only 2 manufacturers of xylazine for the U.S. market. One of those manufacturers does not currently make other controlled drugs and has paused production in the second half of last year due to lack of uniformity and clarity of rulemaking between states. This leaves only one manufacturer currently providing product to the entire US market. Xylazine is a low-volume generic animal drug that generates little revenue for manufacturers. Therefore, adding regulatory burdens or facility investment requirements for the few remaining manufacturers increases the likelihood of supply disruption and could eliminate the drug from the market entirely. The amendment offered to Senate Bill 58 would permit the lawful manufacturing, distribution, and use of FDA-approved and compounded xylazine for veterinarians. The amendment would not impose any additional regulatory burdens or requirements beyond what is already required under state and federal law as a prescription animal drug. Therefore, inclusion of this amendment would reduce the risk of supply disruptions of legitimate xylazine for Vermont veterinarians. Since January of 2023, the AVMA has been engaged with policymakers on federal legislation and policy to preserve veterinary access while they work to address the illicit xylazine. Currently, there are multiple versions of federal legislation moving through Congress to address this issue. Although the final language is still being negotiated, all versions include bipartisan language intended to maintain legitimate xylazine in the market and preserve access and use of the drug by veterinarians and our clients. The AVMA encourages the committee to adopt the amendment offered to Senate Bill 58, as the amendment is vital to safeguarding veterinary access for xylazine's legitimate uses and minimizes risk of supply chain disruptions by not imposing additional regulation on those handling the drug lawfully. The committee's adoption of this amendment would help keep people safe while working with large and dangerous animals, as well as support animal welfare by facilitating access to care. The AVMA appreciates the attention the committee is giving to the needs of veterinary medicine while working to address this public health crisis. We will continue to support the work of the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association to ensure Vermont veterinarians and the animals under their care continue to have access to this important animal drug. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
I guess I don't have any other than ones I asked, Dr. asked. The use on animals,
Yeah.
and does anybody done any studies on the impact on humans? Because we're getting reports of beyond the deaths that are obviously tragic, but also reports of very difficult sores. One person at a drug treatment facility had to have a limb amputated as a result of the use of xylazine, and I'm sure they didn't intend to use it.
Right.
It just happened to be in it.
Well, there's a couple of things. That's a common question that we get. I will say that one thing we know as veterinarians is that drugs behave differently in different species, right? So also when we, even looking at, and again, Dr. Linden can speak even more to this, but I used to use it in cattle as well when I was in cattle practice, but the amount of volume that we use in a 1,200 pound cow is about the same we would use in a 60-pound dog, because their systems process that drug and metabolize that drug differently. So it's not a one-to-one where the weight of any animal would be the amount you would use for any animal. So in terms of its metabolism in humans, again, that's something that as veterinarians, we can't speak necessarily to, but again, there are differences that would exist across species. I think the other important piece of this is, you know, the DEA and the administration have noted many times the substantial source of xylazine is illicit manufacturing overseas and coming across borders. And so, you know, again, sourcing of where this drug is made and how it's made could definitely be impacting potentially, you know, how it behaves in animals as well. And the last point I would make is when we look at the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine reports on adverse events for this drug, skin lesions and sores are not in the top 10 reported adverse events for veterinary species. So it is not something that we commonly see.
And final question from me is cost. I went to my vet Monday to get toothpaste for my dog. It was $10. What is the cost of a dose of xylazine, say, for a 1,200 pound bovine?
it is inexpensive, fortunately, because again, that is a very, a market that obviously is very concerned about costs. And again, I think Dr. Linden can speak even more to that and much more directly to that. But that is one of the benefits of having this drug available is it's been around as a safe and effective FDA approved drug for more than 50 years. And so it is in generic production, so it's inexpensive. And so it's very helpful when we're dealing with food animal patients to be able to utilize a drug that is not really expensive. But it's also used extensively in shelter situations and in small animal, where that is also an incredible asset of using a drug like that, is that it's low cost and it, again, can facilitate care to more animals.
Thank you. So part of the allure in the illicit drug market is the inexpensive nature of xylazine. Thank you very much. Are there other questions for Dr.? Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and good luck in Washington.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Congress will get it right on this one anyway. They don't seem to get anything else right. Well, that was an editorial comment from the chair. Now, it's not the committee's position. Dr. Thomas Linden, the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, Northwest Veterinary Association, and I think he's chair of the Vermont Veterinary Association. Doctor, are you with us?
Yes, can you all hear me?
We can hear you, we just can't see you.
All right, let me see if I'll have to
And it's fine if we can't see you.
I'm not
there we go, now we can see
Zoom modality as you all are well accustomed to. So first I'd like to just start by introducing myself, Dr. Tom Linden of Northwest Veterinary Associates in St. Albans, Vermont. I'd like to just go through some prepared comments and then would be happy to entertain any questions that the senators have for me regarding xylazine. Firstly, I'd just like to start by thanking the committee for allowing me to participate in the discussion. I'm certainly appreciative of the consideration being given to the use of xylazine in my profession. And I can only echo the testimony provided by Dr. Haas and Dr. Hornickel, both of them bringing a much broader perspective on the use of xylazine in veterinary medicine. As a background, I'm a 2013 graduate of the Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine. I have practiced privately since graduation, roughly 2.5 years in central New York as a mixed large animal practitioner. And I'm now coming up on 8 years in Vermont as a dairy production medicine practitioner. I'm the owner at Northwest Veterinary Associates. We're a 5-doctor mobile practice, exclusively serving dairy producers in Franklin, Chittenden, Orleans, and Lamoille counties. Xylazine is one of, if not the most common veterinary sedative I use in my field of work. The purpose is threefold. The safety of the personnel that are assisting me in the procedures that I'm performing on animals, the safety and the welfare of the patient, and then finally my own personal safety. And I put those in the order that I feel personally they should be in. I use it in a variety of scenarios, including several common procedures on a weekly, if not daily basis. And these procedures are not but are not limited to examination, abdominal surgery, or procedures, castration, and disbudding, just to name a few. I can't, it may not be immediately clear to the committee, so I'm starting at pretty base knowledge, but these procedures aren't performed in an operating room setting under general anesthesia like a lot of our human counterparts or even our companion animals, nor are these procedures even performed at my clinic. These animals are often awake, albeit numbed, so as to not experience pain or discomfort. And the sedation and muscle relaxant properties of xylazine are a key component to my successful treatment of the animals I'm working on. The loss of xylazine due to manufacturer discontinuation would greatly inhibit my safe ability to work with and treat cattle. So certainly, again, I am appreciative of the committee, including the language that was proposed by the AVMA, because if not, my job, my ability would be greatly inhibited, along with the concerns over safety of myself and others and the animal. So while my experience and use of xylazine is fairly narrow in scope, I fully appreciate the diversity of my profession and the potential scenarios requiring its use. So therefore fully support the language that the AVMA has recommended with respect to veterinary medicine, and that this committee has seemingly adopted. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to entertain any specific questions relating to the use of xylazine.
Are there any questions for Dr. Lynn? Doctor, thanks for taking time out of your busy day and joining us, and we appreciate your continued work in Vermont. Glad to have you here. And I'm Senator Norris does represent you in Franklin County.
Oh, great. Well, thank you all. It was a pleasure to sit inside for once on a cold morning.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And I think what we're going to do, committee, is there any need to walk through while we still have Dr. Hatz here? Maybe Michelle, just to make sure that I think everybody's good with what you put together here. Maybe you want to specifically walk through for us. And Eric, we're not going to get to you at this hour. And I'm sorry for dragging you down here.
Oh, that's all right.
But I know you love to just come down here anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, so for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, and we're working off version 3.2 of your amendment to S58. So just as a little refresher, so what you have on the xylazine provisions are sections 1 and 2. We're working in Title 18 and Chapter 84, which is the regulated drug chapter. You'll recall the reason why you're needing to add something about xylazine to this chapter is that it's not currently either having a specific section statute that provides for criminal penalties for that, and it doesn't fall into kind of one of the catch-all statutes around stimulants, depressants, and narcotics. So it's kind of its own thing. So you have to create its own statute the way that you did with fentanyl. And so in the first section of the bill, you're just adding xylazine and the definition of xylazine to the definition section that applies throughout Chapter 84. And as I had mentioned earlier, I ran that by Department of Health, and they confirmed that that is the correct way that you write that. I'm not going to read the definition, but that is apparently the appropriate name for it. Section 2 is just a prohibition in subsection A that no person shall possess, dispense, or sell xylazine except as provided in subsection B. You'll recall that when we're working in Chapter 84, it's always divided into those three kind of buckets of possession, dispensing, and sale. And so B provides for the exemption for veterinary uses. Again, this is kind of a a mixture of language that I pulled from federal legislation, as well as looking at the comments that were provided in writing by the ABMA. So you see the language there that what is considered to be permitted activity. So it's dispensing or prescribing for or administration to a non-human species of a drug containing xylazine. And then on page 3, subdivision 2, dispensing or prescribing for or administration to a non-human species permissible person to. And these are constantly referring back to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, because that is where there is authorization for these animal drugs to be used. So we're citing federal law. Subdivision 3 is permitting manufacturing, distribution, or use of xylazine as an active pharmaceutical ingredient for manufacturing an animal drug. And 4 is manufacturing, distribution, or use of xylazine bulk chemical for pharmaceutical compounding by licensed pharmacists or veterinarians. And I realized for some reason the editors capitalized xylazine in subdivision 3, but I'll have that. We'll send it through editing another time, but it shouldn't be capitalized, just a typo. And then the last one being any other use approved or permissible under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So if there is some kind of change at the federal level with regard to the status of the drug and there's other permitted uses, as long as there is a federally permitted use, medical use in veterinary practice or otherwise, then that would be permitted under state law.
What is the 3-year, 5-year, is that consist in the penalty section?
Yes, the
Is that
subsection.
consistent with other drugs?
That is what you had originally asked me to do, is mirror the penalties for fentanyl. Because remember, you didn't create a possession criminal penalty here. You're prohibiting it and saying that you can't unlawfully possess xylazine unless it fits within one of the exceptions of subsection B. But you're not creating a criminal penalty there.
It's just dispensing.
Just for the dispensing and selling. Yep.
Okay, our bells are ringing. For those of you who are following.
We are being summoned.
Pardon me?
I said, we are being summoned.
You are, but it's not, you're regularly elected, so you don't have to go.
Well, that's true.
Of the definition.
Anyhow.
I was doing a good job at doing your explanation of the landlord-tenant pieces there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, he was a sheriff.
Yeah, well, you did a great job explaining it. Kudos to you.
I try to pay attention.